Hello, today we are talking about measuring up for wall frames. So if you're given a set of plans and you've got to measure up how many plates and studs you need to get, we're going to run through my method for doing that. So if we take a very simple set of plans here, most builders building new homes nowadays will just get prefabricated wall frames in, get somebody else to measure up and price the wall framing for you. But if you're a bit of an old school builder like me who likes to still do his own stick framing, or perhaps you live in a slightly remote area where prefab frames are not a particularly appropriate option, you may have to do what's called a stick frame house, where you have to measure up all the materials yourself. So the first thing that we start with is always a checklist. Just a list of all of the components you might be needing to quote on in a job or measure up in a job. And in fact, checklists can be used for all sorts of purposes when you're running your own construction or building design business. Even if you have to meet new clients and discuss a certain number of items, there might be a certain number of things that you need to cover with the clients, or a new job. You can make yourself up a checklist to make sure that you don't miss any items, and you just simply cross them off one at a time as you go through. You leave this list either on your computer where you can print out a new copy each time, or a piece of paper in the filing cabinet when you can photocopy it off. But today we're just going to look at plates and studs. So let's go back to our floor plan. The first thing to do is to measure up how much wall framing needs to go in. So I'm just going to take a measurement down this side of the house. That's 7.2, so I'm just going to go to the nearest half metre. That's about 7 metres long that way, 6 metres wide. That's 13 metres. And I'm just going to double that to make it 26 metres. I know it's an L-shaped house, but that's a little trick with L-shaped buildings. If you measure one full wall and another, times it by 2, that's going to give you the length of these walls as well. It works out to the same measurement. So that leaves me with 26 metres of external wall frame. Now, some of you may have noticed I've just measured straight across these openings. I have not allowed anything less for those openings, and there's a reason for that. First of all, it doesn't affect the plates because they go straight past, but even with studs, if we have a look at a typical opening in a wall frame, we've got an area where studs are missing. We don't need them there. But by the time you add in the extra studs you need beside the opening, the trimmers above and below windows, and some jack studs, you end up using up probably about the same amount of timber that you save in studs not being in that opening. So that's why I just measure straight past. I don't make any allowances. I don't reduce anything for openings. So back to our plans, we've got 26 metres of wall around the outside. Around the inside, we'll just measure up again to the closest half metre I always go. So we've got 2.5, 1.5, another 2.5. What's this one here? I'll allow another 2.5 there and there. Add that all up, that gives me about 10 metres worth of internal wall frames. There's a reason I keep these separate. You could have a situation where the numbers of bottom and top plates are different. You might have a double top plate around the outside but only a single on the inside. Possibly your stud spacings may be different. You may have 450 centres around the outside load-bearing walls and maybe 600 through the internal non-load-bearing walls. Today I'm just going to keep 450mm spacings for all of my studs because I'm not a real big fan of 600 spacings. I don't think it's good building practice, but that's just me. The other reason for keeping them separate I'm going to cover at the end of the video because it doesn't concern plates and studs. So before we start calculating things up, let's start with our framing schedule. So you might have something in your plans that say framing specification or framing schedule, and it tells you exactly how many plates and how many rows of nogs and what your stud spacings are in there. So I'm not going to concentrate too much on this schedule. I'm going to make up some figures that we're going to work with. So I'm saying that we've got a double top plate around the outside of the house, single top plate through the middle walls, a single top plate through the interior walls, but I'm going to keep all of my stud spacings for both at 450. So let's begin with our plates. We've got 26 metres around the outside. I'm just going to say 2 top plates bottom, and I've also got a row of nogging. There's a row of nogging that goes all the way through the middle of all of those walls, so I'm going to throw that in there as well. So that means for the external walls I've got 4 rows of timber, and for the internals I've got 3 rows of timber. And if I add all of that up, 4 times 26 is 104, 3 times 10 obviously is 30, so that gives me about 134 metres of plates and nogs. And I can just order that in whatever long lengths I can. I can order 22 at 6 metres or 27 at 4.8, depending on what lengths you like to get in. You'll notice if you go 22 times 6, it works out to just slightly less than 134. That's okay. I usually end up with a little bit of spare timber left over, so it doesn't worry me to order slightly less than I calculate. If I look at this back wall, if I order 6 metre lengths, I can actually get that wall in one long hit. So that's what I'm going to do in my example. I'm going to stick with 22 lengths at 6 metres. Let's go on to studs. So because all of my stud spacings are the same, I don't need to work them out separately. I'm just going to add these two together. That gives me 36 metres of wall in total. My stud spacing is 450, so I'm going to go 36 divided by 0.45. Never type into your calculator metres divided by millimetres. Make sure you get the decimal point in the right spot. So it's metres divided by metres. That gives me 80 studs. I do have to allow for some extra studs though. Each of these corners, there's a couple of extra studs that go in to build the corner. So if I count up these corners, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, I'm just going to add another 2 studs per corner, so that gives me another 30 studs. Now before you say anything, I know I've got 32 in there. I pressed the wrong button when I was typing this in when I made up the visuals. So ignore that, just pretend it says 30. Always good to double check things. Anyway, let's keep moving on. So that gives me 80 plus 30 is another 110 studs. I might even just order 115. Most jobs I've ended up just slightly short of studs. And that's really not a problem because as a builder you don't want to end up with a dozen studs left over at the end of the job. You've got to throw them on the ute and store them somewhere. I personally would much rather just drive into work one morning and pick up the few studs that I'm short on the way in just to finish off the wall framing. So don't be afraid just to throw a couple of extra on, but don't allow an extra 50 studs just in case. It's much better just to pick up a few extra ones that you need. So that gives me 115. I've just written 2.4 because that's kind of the minimum height of a wall. If it's taller, you obviously get taller timbers. But the important thing is I order my studs at the next orderable length. I order my plates in long lengths. And the reason is if I just group it all together and get a bunch of 6 metre lengths, that means I'm having to go through and cut individual studs, which takes ages. If you buy them all at the orderable length, you just throw a bunch of them on your saw stools, cut down both sides with your 9 1/4 inch power saw, and you've cut a bunch of studs in one hit. So that's my method for measuring up for the wall frame. The last thing I want to touch on is something I skipped earlier. I mentioned one more reason for keeping the internal and external wall frames as separate measurements. When I progress to measuring up for my wall linings and my wall cladding, so when I look at my internal walls, they're going to be sheeted both sides with my lining. The external's only sheeted one side. So I'll take this figure, times it by 2, so that's 20, add my external 26, so that's 46 metres times the height of the wall gives me the area of lining. When I go to the cladding, I've already got my distance around the house, so I'll be going 26 metres times the height of my walls to work out the area of cladding. So keeping them separate just gives me a bit of a head start on measuring up for the cladding and the lining on that job. Okay, hopefully this helps you out with measuring up for wall frames. Thank you and good luck.